A warm welcome to all of you, where everyday stories become testimonies of courage, justice, and the power of truth. In today's video, if at any moment you feel anger, empathy, or even a spark of inspiration, that's the moment you're truly connecting with the heart of the story. Leave a comment below. What do you think about Natalie's actions? And if you were faced with injustice, what would you do? If you like it, hit that subscribe button. If you don't, just drop a comment with the number 1. Owen and his wife Natalie had spent months searching for a peaceful place to begin their family life. When they arrived at Clearwater Shores, a quiet lakeside neighborhood in Oregon, everything seemed perfect. The breeze rustled through crimson maple leaves, the sunset reflected off the water like a giant sheet of glass, and the craftsman-style homes with sweeping porches lined the gray cobblestone street. This was supposed to be a place where Natalie could peacefully rest during her pregnancy, and Owen could assemble their first crib in a sun-drenched room. But just hours after the moving truck pulled away, they realized they hadn't stepped into a community. They had entered the territory of a dictatorship named Karen. The first person to approach wasn't a neighbor with a friendly greeting. It was a thin woman with platinum blonde hair tied up, wearing a polo shirt embroidered with the HOA logo and holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Welcome to Clearwater Shores," Karen said with a rigid smile, as if permanently grafted onto her face. Her eyes scanned from Natalie's pregnant belly to the old SUV they had just parked in the driveway, finally landing on the welcome mat that read, "Home Sweet Home," as if it were Exhibit A in a criminal investigation. Owen barely opened his mouth when Karen extended a thick folder with the bold title, Resident Standards Manual, Mandatory Edition. "We take uniformity very seriously," she said, then turned to Natalie with a saccharine, condescending tone. "Congratulations. It's wonderful to have time to focus on family." Natalie offered a polite yet guarded smile. Owen, on the other hand, was already beginning to feel the icy wave of an unseen threat. Within the first week, they received 3 violation notices. One for a mailbox deemed too creative because of its solar-powered light, one for a bush on the porch not being trimmed into an approved spherical shape, and one because their garbage bin had been placed outside 14 minutes past the allowed time. Natalie laughed at first, but that laughter vanished after the 4th notice. That one came with a printed photo from a security camera, Karen standing in front of their house, pointing at the newly installed curtains with a caption, "Color not included in the approved palette." Each morning, when Owen stepped out to get the newspaper, Karen stood on her porch across the street, staring like he might be hiding explosives behind their walls. Each afternoon, Natalie would barely set down her watering can when Karen appeared on the sidewalk, pretending to talk on the phone, yet never taking her eyes off her. They no longer felt like residents. They had become targets in a game they never agreed to play. What made things worse wasn't the rules themselves, but how Karen weaponized those rules to control, discriminate, and emotionally terrorize. The welcome to Clearwater Shores wasn't an invitation. It was a cold warning. Assimilate or be exiled. And while Owen still tried to keep things quiet, Natalie began to see past the lakeside flower beds. She realized the peace here was nothing more than a glossy coat over a rotten system, and Karen held the key to the gates of that hell. The days that followed in Clearwater Shores were no longer the settling in period Owen and Natalie had hoped for. Every morning began not with collecting mail, but with facing a new warning from the HOA, each one printed on crisp white paper, stamped with a red seal like an official legal document. One day it was non-compliant lawn ornaments. Another day it was wind chimes disrupting the ambient soundscape. Owen had once thought it was just the work of a bored council, until Natalie whispered one night, "I think she's watching me." At first, Owen thought it was just a feeling, but then he started noticing. Karen always seemed to appear at odd moments, when Natalie was watering the plants, when Owen was installing the security cameras, even when they were simply sitting on the porch drinking tea. She never stepped onto their property, but she was always there at the edge of the sidewalk, pretending to talk on her phone, tapping on a tablet that clearly wasn't for watching Netflix. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like a lingering mental fog that wouldn't lift. One morning, Owen was replacing the hammock rope behind the house when he heard footsteps near the fence. He turned just in time to see Karen standing there, staring straight at Natalie's belly. "Hope she's not overexerting herself," she said, as if referring to someone invisible. "Some women, close to their due date, get a little emotionally unstable." Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, leaving Owen frozen, feeling as though someone had just shoved him across a line he didn't know was there. It didn't stop there. At the neighborhood welcome party, a gathering that should have been nothing more than cold beers and pasta salad, Karen turned the community space into her personal stage. Natalie, in a soft yellow dress that hugged her round belly, was chatting with an elderly couple when Karen approached, holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Owen, then turned to Natalie with feigned surprise. "Oh, still abstaining?" "Even now?" Natalie smiled politely. "Doctor's orders." But Karen wouldn't stop. "Wine helps with stress, you know, unless there's something to be stressed about." Her voice was velvet smooth, but behind it was the edge of a blade. The air froze for a few seconds. Some of the neighbors began glancing over, trying to mask their discomfort. And then, as if following a scripted scene, Karen accidentally spilled her wine onto Natalie's feet. "Oops, I'm such a klutz," she gasped theatrically, though her eyes sparkled with a quiet, hidden delight. From that day on, the harassment no longer felt random. It became systematic. They received an official notice from the HOA, a violation for a sarcastic and inappropriate welcome mat. It simply read, "Go away," in Comic Sans font. A courtesy investigation was suggested, not into Karen's behavior, but into the hostile atmosphere the Owens were supposedly creating. Then came one quiet evening. Natalie was watering the plants when Karen appeared at the end of the driveway. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She just raised her phone and started filming. Not the house, not the lawn. Natalie, as if she were a threat that needed to be recorded as evidence. When Owen stepped out from the house, Karen lowered the phone and smiled, just checking to make sure everything's safe. This wasn't mere discomfort anymore. This was psychological warfare, where every glance, every footstep, every doorbell ring could be a form of attack. And Natalie, who once believed this would be a peaceful place to give birth, now understood she had to prepare for a battle. Not just for the right to live in Clearwater Shores, but for the right to exist with her dignity intact. Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere inside Clearwater Shores Community Center was as heavy as if someone had just predicted a coming storm. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows across the main hall, a space usually reserved for senior yoga classes and DIY candle-making workshops, now transformed into an unofficial courtroom. On the table sat a tray of stale cookies and a water cooler labeled "Sponsored by HOA," but no one touched them. Everyone was waiting, not to listen, but to witness. Karen arrived first. Ivory blazer, hair pulled into a tight bun, makeup heavy as if she were about to go live on national television. She sat squarely in the center, clutching a thick folder of documents, chin tilted up like she could smell rebellion in the air. Flanking her were the HOA board members, looking more like hostages than actual allies. One kept rubbing his temples, the other fidgeted with his phone as if searching for an excuse to leave. Owen and Natalie arrived a few minutes later. They said nothing. They didn't look for seats. Natalie stood silently at the back of the room, dressed in a simple gray dress, her expression so calm it was almost cold. Her 8-month pregnant belly made her stand out in the crowd, but no one dared meet her eyes. They weren't there to defend themselves. They were there to face it. Karen rose like a villain out of a legal thriller. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice echoing through the room thanks to a handheld mic. "As president of the Clearwater Shores HOA, I have a duty to protect the order, values, and harmony of this community." She held up her folder, every page neatly stapled and numbered. This document outlines all the violations committed by the residents of Unit 9B, from disruptive behavior, defiance, to falsifying medical information. The room went dead silent. Someone whispered, "Falsifying medical info? What does that mean?" But Karen ignored it. Her eyes skimmed over Natalie like a blade over skin. This woman has used personal circumstances to dodge responsibility. Let's be clear, pregnancy is not a moral exemption card. The tension thickened. A few neighbors turned their heads to look at Natalie, but she didn't flinch. Only when Karen pointed directly at her did the words strike like a hammer, hitting the surface of a still pond. You've exploited sympathy, weaponized empathy, and used your unborn child as a shield to manipulate this community. That's when Natalie spoke, soft as a breeze, yet loud enough for the entire room to hear. Then I only have one question. What action of mine violated the HOA bylaws? Karen hesitated. This isn't about bylaws, it's about morality. Natalie tilted her head. So it's personal? And then, like a tightly wound spring snapping after being pulled too far, Karen stepped down from the podium. She stormed across the room and slapped Natalie straight across the face. The sound cracked through the air like breaking glass. A slap not just aimed at skin, but the complete collapse of so-called moral authority. Everyone jumped to their feet. A woman shouted, "You just hit a pregnant woman." A man near the front barked, "Are you out of your mind?" Karen backed up, raising both hands. She provoked me, but it was too late. A board member tapped the mic. "This meeting is adjourned." Karen screamed, "I'm the president!" But no one listened anymore. All eyes were on Natalie, still standing tall, her cheek red, her eyes not angry, but sharp as forged steel. She calmly turned to leave. Just before walking out the door, she stopped, looked Karen in the eye, and said, "You want a war? Fine. But next time, the battlefield won't be this meeting room. It'll be a courtroom." And Karen, the woman who once believed her authority was untouchable, could only stand there, frozen, as she realized she had just opened the door to her own downfall. No one in the Clearwater Shores Community Center would ever forget that moment. The moment Karen's power shattered like a shard of glass beneath cold fluorescent lights. The slap didn't just leave a red mark on Natalie's cheek. It ignited a slow-burning fire across the entire neighborhood, a fire of awakening, a fire of justice. Owen rushed forward to catch his wife, but Natalie gently placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling she didn't need help. She didn't need saving. She had been preparing for this moment all along. The entire room froze. So did Karen. Her hand still hung awkwardly mid-air, trembling slightly. In her own stunned gaze, Karen realized she had gone too far. But instead of remorse, she looked around for support. No one moved. A woman on the HOA board whispered into the mic, "This meeting is adjourned." And just like that, everyone withdrew from Karen. Former allies, once silent neighbors. She stood alone, teetering like a fallen monument. Outside, Natalie didn't cry. She didn't shake. Instead, she placed her hand on her belly and stared straight ahead at the building, as if closing one chapter and preparing to turn the page. "She just destroyed herself," Owen whispered. Natalie shook her head softly. "Not yet. She thinks this was a fight, but she doesn't know what happens when you actually break the law." That evening, in the warm glow of their living room, Natalie opened each envelope, each HOA warning they had received over the past 2 months. She organized them by date, cross-referenced each one with the HOA charter, and highlighted the sections Karen and the board had abused to issue baseless fines. They violated their own bylaws, she said calmly, as if preparing a courtroom presentation. Because, in truth, Natalie was a federal attorney, a detail Karen had never bothered to find out. By midnight, Natalie had compiled 3 full case files: violations of the HOA charter, harassment and physical assault, and a petition for an emergency restraining order. In the final file, she included a photo of her bruised cheek, statements from at least 3 eyewitnesses at the meeting, and an audio recording submitted by a neighbor in the front row, who had secretly recorded the entire event on their phone because, in their words, "I haven't felt safe ever since Karen walked into the room." Meanwhile, Karen scrambled to spin the narrative. She went door to door with a box of cookies and half-hearted apologies. "Everyone makes mistakes," she told the Haskins couple across the street. Mrs. Haskins said nothing. She took the cookies, shut the door, and tossed them straight into the trash. Whispers began to spread, not from Natalie, but from those who had once stayed silent. "She's been watching them all day. She hit a pregnant woman. We've let her run this place for far too long." Natalie didn't need to rally anyone. She didn't need to persuade. The truth, when laid out with evidence, doesn't need a spokesman. Just 3 days later, the court issued an emergency summons. Karen was ordered to appear in court to respond to charges of assault, systematic harassment, and civil rights violations. When the notice arrived, Karen stood frozen on her porch, clutching the envelope with trembling hands, as if it held her sentence. To outsiders, it may have looked like a personal dispute, but to Natalie, to Owen, and now to all of Clearwater Shores, this was a turning point. Collapse doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with a slap. And the echo of that slap is a community awakened. Just hours after Karen's slap, Natalie was no longer just a harassed pregnant woman. She became the plaintiff, and Clearwater Shores officially turned into a legal battleground. No complaints, no visible anger. Natalie moved with the cold precision of someone more familiar with courtrooms than the noise of neighborhood meetings. She didn't react with emotion. She retaliated with paperwork, bylaws, and evidence. That night, while Owen sat reading on the couch, Natalie worked at the dining table, laptop open, 3 thick files neatly color-coded, HOA regulation violations, personal harassment, and threats against a pregnant woman. Karen thought this was a game, Natalie said, fingers gliding across the keyboard, but she's about to find out what it feels like when the law steps in for real. The next morning, Natalie filed for an emergency restraining order at the county courthouse, submitting video footage of the meeting, witness testimonies, and copies of illegitimate HOA violations. But that was only the beginning. She wasn't just going after Karen, she was going after the entire HOA board that had enabled a 2-month-long campaign of psychological harassment. With the icy tone of a federal attorney, Natalie called the County Office of Community Organization Oversight, lodging an official complaint for abuse of HOA power, unlawful fines, and discrimination against pregnant women, a serious violation of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. The next day, while Karen was still posting vague, blame-shifting status updates in the neighborhood Facebook group, Natalie had already submitted a full complaint to the Oregon State Civil Rights Division. From that difficult pregnant woman Karen had once whispered about, Natalie had now become a symbol of clarity, precision, and zero tolerance. Every old violation notice was logged into an Excel sheet, cross-checked line by line with the HOA's own charter. Every vague threat on social media was screenshot, time-stamped, and archived with the name of the poster and relevant comments. She wasn't just gathering evidence, she was building a complete civil lawsuit. Karen, meanwhile, still didn't seem to grasp the storm approaching. She went door to door with trays of muffins and a face that silently pleaded, "Please understand me." But the shift had already begun. Those who once stayed silent now nodded respectfully when passing Natalie. An elderly woman, once scolded by Karen for parking slightly askew, quietly slipped an envelope into Natalie's hand with a note. "I'm willing to testify." A week later, the official civil lawsuit was filed. Defendant, Karen, co-defendants, 3 HOA board members who had signed the bogus violations. Allegations: prolonged emotional harm, systemic harassment, defamation, discrimination, and misconduct in the governance of a community organization. The HOA's attorney responded with a 3-line email. "We propose an informal mediation." Natalie replied with just one sentence. "We're well past informal now." Only then did Karen begin to feel the cracks forming. Her former defenders said nothing. The HOA board members grew silent, one by one backing away. One sent Natalie an anonymous email. "I didn't sign up to be a witness for criminal behavior." But Natalie didn't need them. She had the law, the evidence, and the truth. And in this battle, those were the 3 things Karen could never control. On the day of the hearing, the sky hung gray and heavy, as if even the weather understood that this was no ordinary trial. Inside the courtroom, fluorescent light reflected off white-painted concrete walls, and silence was broken only by the click of high heels. Karen entered. She chose to appear alone. No lawyer, no legal counsel, just a leather-bound file folder and her phone screen still lit. Her ivory blazer buttoned to the collar, deep red lipstick like a warning flare. Karen smiled at the clerk as though she were attending another HOA meeting, not facing charges of harassment, assault, and abuse of power. In the back row, Owen and Natalie sat silently. Natalie looked serene, as if she were the judge herself. In front of her were 3 thick folders, one for documents, one for digital evidence, and one solely for witness statements. On the cover, handwritten, Clearwater Shores, vs. Karen Randall. The judge was an older woman, short silver hair, a sharp gaze, and a tone that allowed no room for carelessness. "Let's begin the hearing," she said, eyes scanning the room before resting on Karen. "Defendant representing herself?" Karen stood, smiling confidently. "I'm fully capable of defending myself, Your Honor." Then she began, a rambling monologue blaming hypersensitive neighbors, a hostile environment, and people not understanding the role of a proper HOA. She spoke of regulations being ignored, of defiant behavior, and especially how Natalie used her pregnancy to avoid community responsibilities. The judge cut in. "Do you have any evidence for that serious accusation?" Karen scoffed and held up her phone. Messages, posts, verbal accounts from residents who felt threatened. "Do you have any sworn affidavits?" the judge asked. "Not yet, but they would, if they weren't pressured," Karen replied, eyes shifting. The judge nodded, then turned to Natalie. "Plaintiff, present your evidence." Natalie rose, no theatrics, no raised voice, just calm, clear delivery. She proceeded in order. First, a chart listing 17 improperly issued HOA warnings. Then, video footage from the community meeting where Karen struck her. Next, screenshots of sarcastic Facebook posts, her home address clearly visible in the background. Finally, Natalie placed a contract on the table, an invoice from a private surveillance firm hired to monitor her home for 3 months. Karen's face went pale. "That has nothing to do with this case." "On the contrary," Natalie replied, "it's proof of unlawful surveillance, and it's already been submitted to the district attorney's office." The judge didn't need further discussion. She opened the file, flipped through a few pages, then spoke. "This court finds sufficient evidence of systematic harassment, assault, and abuse of authority. The defendant is subject to a 12-month restraining order. The civil lawsuit will proceed. Additionally, the petition for HOA dissolution will be reviewed in a separate hearing." Karen stood frozen. No one looked at her. No one rose to join her. Everyone filed out in silence. Karen remained seated, her hands clutching her head as the courtroom door shut behind them. And outside, Clearwater Shores finally exhaled. After the fateful trial, Karen was no longer just a whispered name on the sidewalk. She became a living punctuation mark, signaling the end of an era ruled by fear at Clearwater Shores. The very next morning, her name disappeared from the neighborhood bulletin board. No more HOA notices, no more warnings about welcome mats or overly creative mailboxes. And strangely, it wasn't an emptiness that followed. It was a quiet relief that spread through the entire neighborhood. Karen withdrew into the shadows quietly, but not entirely silently. She no longer came outside in the mornings. No more clipboards, no more brisk patrols along the sidewalk. Her house, once a symbol of HOA power, was now dim and dilapidated. The lawn overgrown, the flower beds wilted, and the Yard of the Month sign she had once nominated herself for was now stuffed behind the trash bin like a silent confession. On her porch appeared something never seen before, a "for sale" sign. When Natalie walked past, newborn daughter in her arms, she only glanced at the house. There was no need for a smile, no need for a stare. True victory isn't in humiliation, it's in peace. Since the HOA was dissolved, Clearwater Shores had transformed. The oppressive rules once wielded like weapons were gone. A group of volunteers formed a new Neighborhood Freedom Alliance. No fines, no clipboards, only support and understanding. Seniors could park near their doors without fear of reprimand. Children could draw chalk on the sidewalks without being accused of public vandalism. And welcome mats, Christmas, Halloween, or just plain goofy, were all welcome so long as they made people smile. But for Natalie, the victory didn't come from Karen's departure. It came from the precedent that was set. As news of her lawsuit spread across civil rights and HOA management forums, other neighborhoods began re-examining how their associations operated. A local reporter wrote, "The pregnant woman at Clearwater Shores didn't just defend her home, she lit the spark for a small-scale but deeply influential reform." In her final weeks at Clearwater, Karen tried to negotiate. Her lawyer sent a post-crisis settlement agreement, a substantial sum in exchange for withdrawing the lawsuit and keeping the matter private. Natalie responded with one line, "I don't want your money. I want you out of the system." And the court made sure of that. Karen was permanently banned from holding any position in any HOA within the entire county. Her house went dark, curtains drawn, and on a misty morning, the moving truck rolled quietly down the maple-lined street. No one waved. No one stepped outside. She left like a shadow. No apology. No goodbye. Only a hollow house and a past scrubbed clean. That night, Natalie sat on the front steps, her daughter in her arms, the flickering glow of candles lining the neighboring porches. One by one, neighbors placed candles on their doorsteps. No one spoke, but everyone understood. It wasn't because Karen had lost. It was because someone had finally said no when everyone else stayed silent. And in that dim, quiet light, Natalie whispered to her daughter, "One day, if someone tries to make you bow your head, remember, your mother once stood up, and the whole neighborhood stood with her." In an era where power is often cleverly disguised beneath the veil of community rules, the story of Natalie at Clearwater Shores is not merely a battle between a pregnant woman and a tyrannical HOA president. It is a wake-up call for those who've stayed silent in the face of injustice, who've yielded out of exhaustion, or looked the other way to avoid conflict. This story poses a bold and resounding question. Do we stay silent for peace, or because we've given up on justice? Natalie was not an activist. She didn't shout in the streets, call for boycotts, or knock on doors demanding support. All she did was stand up, at the right time, in the right way, and with the very weapon Karen never expected: the law and a clear mind. While Karen wielded clipboards and violation notices like blades aimed at people's dignity, Natalie countered with evidence, statutes, and unshakable persistence. The message here is not about one person winning. It's about how an ordinary person can do something extraordinary simply by refusing to yield. Natalie didn't just protect her right to live in peace. She defended the right not to be manipulated by fear, the right to be respected, and most importantly, the right to speak up without having to shout. In a world where many believe only the loudest voices are heard, Natalie reminds us that calm is a form of power. She didn't respond with rage, but with clarity. She didn't threaten. She took action. She didn't seek revenge. She laid the groundwork for lasting change. And that, above all, is what made her resistance effective to the core. This story also delivers a deeper truth. Real power does not lie in titles. It lies in righteousness. Karen had the position. She had the system. She had the illusion of support. But she crumbled because she forgot one thing. A community does not exist to serve the ego of one. It exists through trust, respect, and connection. And more than anything, Clearwater Shores is living proof that injustice only needs one person with enough resolve to be dismantled. One person, just one, can change the heartbeat of an entire neighborhood. When Natalie stood up, those who had once stayed silent began to listen. Then they nodded. Then they acted, not because she rallied them, but because they saw themselves in her courage. The message of this story doesn't end with a single HOA. It echoes beyond, into any community, organization, or situation where people are crushed by rules devoid of humanity. It tells us all, never underestimate the power of a timely voice. Never dismiss the quiet one, especially if they're quietly gathering evidence. Because sometimes, the loudest person in the room isn't the one in control. It's the one preparing to open their case in court. In her journey to confront Karen and the authoritarian HOA system at Clearwater Shores, Natalie not only reclaimed justice for herself, but also left behind powerful life lessons, ones that each of us can apply, no matter who we are, where we live, or how old we may be. First and foremost, calm determination is one of the most powerful tools when facing injustice. Natalie didn't yell. She didn't lash out in anger. She didn't run away. Instead, she quietly gathered evidence, studied the rules, and acted with intelligence. She proved that you don't need to be loud to make change happen. You just need truth and a clear plan. In today's world, where what's right can often be drowned out by noise and public pressure, Natalie's quiet yet unyielding resistance becomes a precious compass for us all. Second, this story reminds us that power should never be placed in the hands of those who lack integrity. Karen represents the type of person who wields rules for ego, not for community. Her downfall serves as a wake-up call to neighborhoods, organizations, even families, that every system only thrives when built on transparency, fairness, and respect for human dignity. When power is abused, it is the responsibility of the people to rise, not through violence, but through voice and the law. Third, Natalie teaches us the value of refusing to compromise with what is wrong. Many choose silence to avoid trouble, fearing retaliation, or thinking, if everyone else can live with it, I guess I can too. But that silence is precisely the soil where injustice takes root. Had Natalie done nothing, Karen would have continued to oppress others in the community. Sometimes we stand up not just for ourselves, but for those who haven't yet found the courage to speak. Finally, this story shows us that big change often starts with small actions. A pregnant woman, a slap that seemed insignificant, a single lawsuit. These were the sparks that brought down a broken system, and that reality brings hope to anyone who has ever felt too small to make a difference. The truth is, you are big enough if your cause is right and your actions deliberate. In life, you can't avoid conflict. You won't always meet kind people. But you always have the power to choose how you respond. And as Natalie showed us, you can change an entire system with nothing more than truth and courage. If today's story made you reflect on silence, on resilience, or on how an ordinary person can change an entire community, then don't forget to hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. We'd love to hear your honest thoughts. Do you stand with Natalie, or do you see things differently? Leave a comment below, whether it's positive or critical, because every opinion matters and it helps this community grow stronger together.